I want you to take a second and imagine the cloud. Like when you save a photo from your phone or ask an AI to summarize a long email.
Right. We're all basically taught to picture this, invisible, weightless digital space.
Exactly, just this pristine thing floating somewhere above us. But for this deep dive, I need you to completely erase that image.
Yeah, because the cloud is definitely not made of air.
No, and it certainly isn't magic. It is this incredibly heavy, resource-hungry beast. And to survive, I mean, it requires literal mountains of specialized steel, thousands of miles of copper wire, and staggering swaths of physical land.
We've become so conditioned by, the slick, frictionless software side of the AI boom that we've totally lost sight of its physical reality.
Yeah.
And that physical reality is currently on a direct collision course with global economics, manufacturing limits, and our fundamental infrastructure.
Which is exactly our mission today. We are cutting through all the software hype to uncover the physical limits of the AI revolution. We're going to unpack the unprecedented strain that AI is putting on the U.S. power grid. We'll look at the critical global shortage of heavy electrical equipment, and we'll see how these global supply chain issues are starking fierce local battles right now in America's backyards.
Especially zooming in on the town of Hobart, Indiana.
Right. And to do this, we are drawing on a really diverse stack of sources today.
We are. We've got recent policy reports from the Belfer Center at Harvard, trade analysis from the Coalition for a Prosperous America, some dense supply chain data from Wood Mackenzie.
Love a good government accountability report in there, too.
Oh, yeah, always. Plus, a huge stack of local Indiana news and legal filings from late 2025 and early 2026.
It's a fascinating paper trail. Because if you just rewind a little bit, like from 2021 to around 2024, the entire panic in the tech industry was all about computing chips.
Right, getting the GPUs.
Exactly. Everyone was fighting tooth and nail to get enough specialized semiconductors. But reading through these sources, it is abundantly clear that the bottleneck has fundamentally shifted.
It really has.
Like in 2026, the panic isn't about getting the chips. The panic is about finding enough electricity to actually turn those chips on.
Yeah, that is the defining pivot of the industry right now. I mean, to put some numbers to it, data centers currently use around 4.4% of the total electricity in the U.S.
Which is already a lot.
It is, but the growth curve is staggering. Goldman Sachs is forecasting a 15% compound annual growth rate.
Wow.
Yeah, meaning by 2030, they could be consuming 8% of all U.S. electricity.
8%.
Yeah.
I mean, for context, that is a colossal amount of power for a single industry to pull from a grid that we all share.
And our grid simply wasn't designed to handle it. You have to understand, data centers do not draw power like a typical residential neighborhood.
Right, because neighborhoods fluctuate.
Exactly. In a neighborhood, demand goes up when people get home from work and, turn on their ovens or their AC units, and it drops significantly at night when everyone goes to sleep.
Makes sense.
But data centers demand a constant, unyielding flow of power 24 hours a day. And beyond that, AI training tasks require these massive bursts of intense computation across thousands of graphic processing units simultaneously.
Which causes huge spikes.
Huge, sudden, extreme fluctuations in demand. And we saw a really stark example of what happens when this dynamic goes wrong back in July 2024.
Oh, right, in Northern Virginia,
Uh,
which is, widely considered the data center capital of the world.
Yeah, so in that instance, there was a voltage fluctuation on the grid. Now, AI chips are incredibly delicate, right? They require a highly precise, stable voltage.
Okay.
If the grid voltage dips even slightly, the server's built-in protection systems will just automatically pull the plug to save the silicon from frying.
Oh, wow.
So because of this single fluctuation, 60 different data centers dropped offline simultaneously.
That is wild.
And that suddenly stranded 1,500 megawatts of power on the grid, creating this colossal power surplus.
I think we need a good way to visualize this. So think of the power grid like a commercial airplane in flight. The grid operators constantly have to balance the weight of the electricity being generated with the electricity being consumed.
Right.
So if 60 data centers suddenly reject 1,500 megawatts, it's like all the passengers on the plane suddenly sprinting to one side of the aircraft.
That's a great way to look at it.
To keep the plane from stalling and crashing out of the sky, the operators have to drastically and immediately dump baggage out the window. In grid terms, they had to make emergency adjustments to prevent a cascading blackout across the entire mid-Atlantic region.
Yeah, it demonstrated just how fragile the balance of our power grid really is when dealing with the sheer scale of these hyperscale facilities.
So what does this all mean? If I had to put it in everyday terms, it's like you went out and bought this spectacular state-of-the-art appliance for your house. The absolute best AI system money can buy. But the moment it arrives, you realize you can't just plug it into the wall. You actually have to tear up the street and rewire your entire neighborhood just to turn the thing on.
And that analogy brings us directly to the next profound hurdle in this whole infrastructure crisis.
Right.
Because to get that staggering amount of power from the high voltage transmission lines down to a level that the data center can actually use without vaporizing its servers, you need highly specific, heavy-duty equipment.
The transformers.
Exactly. You need large power transformers. And according to our supply chain sources, the world is quite literally running out of them.
Now, when most people hear transformer, they probably picture those little gray trash can-looking cylinders up on telephone poles in their neighborhood.
Yeah, but that is definitely not what we're talking about here. Those are distribution transformers. The equipment data centers require are large power transformers, or LPTs.
Okay.
These machines are the size of a 2-story house.
Wait, really? A house?
Yes, they can weigh hundreds of tons, and a single unit can cost upward of $10 million. And you fundamentally cannot operate a data center without them.
Wow.
But historically, if a utility or a builder ordered one of these, the lead time, the time from signing the purchase order to actual delivery was about 6 to 8 months.
Pretty standard for heavy industrial stuff.
Right. But today, largely because the AI boom is just buying up all the capacity, that lead time has stretched to an agonizing 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years just waiting for the foundational equipment to turn the power on. That's insane. And reading the sources, this isn't just a tech industry problem isolated to Silicon Valley, is it?
No, not at all. This shortage is bleeding into everyday critical infrastructure. It has very real, very dangerous human consequences.
Yeah, the Daily Explainer highlighted that highly concerning anecdote about a rural hospital in Mississippi.
Right.
They desperately needed a new transformer to expand a critical care wing. They ordered it, but because of this global backlog, they were given an 18-month wait time.
Which a hospital obviously can't afford.
Exactly. Unable to just halt operations, they had to rig up a temporary electrical setup. And that temporary system eventually overloaded and failed, plunging the hospital into an 8-hour blackout.
Which is terrifying.
Thankfully, their life safety system stayed online via backup diesel generators, but they were forced to cancel essential surgeries. All because the global supply of transformers has essentially dried up to feed other industries.
Yeah.
But wait, I'm genuinely confused here, and I want to push back on this. We live in an era where we can automate the manufacturing of nanometer-scale microchips.
Sure.
So if demand is completely off the charts and these machines are selling for $10 million a pop, why isn't capitalism solving this? Why aren't we just throwing up transformer factories everywhere in the U.S. to meet the demand?
It's a completely logical question. But the barrier is that building a large power transformer is much closer to a bespoke art form than traditional assembly line manufacturing.
Really? An art form?
Yeah, you cannot fully automate it. It requires highly specialized manual labor, specifically coil winders.
Coil winders.
Right. A coil winder has to manually wrap thousands of pounds of heavy copper wire around a steel core with absolute millimeter precision.
Oh, man.
If there is a single micro tear in the paper insulation during that winding process, the transformer can catastrophically short circuit and literally explode when they activate it.
So it has to be perfect.
Perfect. It takes years to master this skill, and currently the average age of a U.S. worker in this specific field is 55 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, younger generations simply aren't entering the trade fast enough to replace them.
So we have a severe skilled labor bottleneck preventing us from scaling up.
That is half of the equation. The other half involves the raw physical materials.
Okay.
The core of these transformers requires something called grain-oriented electrical steel, or GOACE.
GOACE, got it.
Making GOACE is this incredibly complex metallurgical process. It involves precisely aligning the iron crystals in the steel to allow magnetic fields to pass through efficiently.
So you can't just use regular steel.
No, not at all. It is incredibly difficult to manufacture, and there are only a handful of specialized mills globally that can even produce it at the required scale. You can't build a transformer without it, and you certainly can't just build a new GOES steel mill overnight.
Which leads right into the severe trade blind spot that the Coalition for a Prosperous America pointed out in their reporting.
Right.
Because we spent the last few years totally focused on moving computing hardware manufacturing away from China. And it worked to an extent.
Yeah, we reshored a lot of it.
We did. The U.S. imported nearly $580 billion in computing hardware, servers, chips, cooling systems, mostly from diversified sources.
Yep.
But the power stack, the heavy transformers, the switchgear, the industrial batteries,
Yeah.
that $70 billion market is still overwhelmingly reliant on imports.
And the trade data reveals a very concerning loophole there. While direct transformer imports from China have officially dropped due to high tariffs, Chinese exports of transformers to Vietnam and Thailand have mysteriously surged.
Yeah, wonder why.
Right. And at the exact same time, those countries' exports of transformers to the U.S. have skyrocketed.
Yeah, let me give a quick translation for that for the listener. That process is called transshipping, meaning companies are boxing up Chinese electrical equipment, shipping it across the border to Vietnam, swapping the label to say made in Vietnam, and then sending it to America to avoid paying the tariff.
Exactly.
So we successfully reshored the computing chips, but we completely ignored securing the heavy power equipment required to actually run them.
Which creates a fascinating geographic pivot. Because tech giants are locked in this intense arms race for AI dominance, they cannot afford to wait 5 years for a grid upgrade in Virginia or California.
No, they need the power now.
They need staggering amounts of power, and they need it yesterday. So they are literally pulling out the map and hunting for anywhere in the country that has existing surplus power on the grid.
Which brings this global supply chain crisis directly to the doorsteps of everyday people in America's Midwest.
Precisely. To bypass the overloaded tech hubs, hyperscalers are making unprecedented investments in regions that haven't traditionally been known for tech.
Which brings us to ground zero for this conflict. Hobart, Indiana.
Right. So Amazon recently announced an astounding $15 billion investment across northern Indiana to build sprawling data center campuses.
$15 billion.
Yeah. And the city of Hobart is currently finalizing a deal for one of these colossal sites. We are talking about 650 to 700 plus acres of land situated directly across the street from existing residential subdivisions.
Now, we really need to look at both sides of this objectively because the city leadership has a very compelling argument for why this is necessary.
They do.
Mayor Josh Huddleston has pointed out that the city is facing severe property tax losses mandated by the state legislature. The local government desperately needs new revenue streams so they don't have to put the tax burden entirely on the residents just to keep schools and emergency services funded.
Right. And from an urban planning perspective, this site is perfectly situated for Amazon's needs. It is already located near major fiber optic networks, and crucially, it sits right next to 345 kilovolt high-tension transmission lines.
Just to clarify, those 345 kilovolt lines are essentially the massive interstate highways of the power grid.
Exactly.
They carry electricity at voltages so high they would instantly vaporize the normal wiring in your house. So being next to them is the holy grail for a data center. Plus, the city notes the project brings thousands of temporary construction jobs and hundreds of well-paying, long-term technical jobs.
Sure, but the residents living across the street see the development very differently. Thousands of residents are actively protesting.
Yeah, it's getting intense.
They have actually filed a formal lawsuit against the City Plan Commission and the City Council over the rezoning of this land from residential, or R3, to light industrial M1.
I have to ask, is this just a standard case of not in my backyard? I mean, people protest traditional factories all the time in the Midwest. Are these AI data centers fundamentally different from the manufacturing plants these towns are historically used to?
What's fascinating here is the sheer density and continuous operational scale of the infrastructure. The residents' lawsuit and their local advocacy groups point out that this is not just a quiet warehouse storing some computers.
Right.
Based on the initial proposals, residents are facing the prospect of up to 25 separate industrial buildings on this site.
25 buildings.
And because data centers cannot afford to lose power for even a millisecond, each of those buildings could house up to 24 industrial-scale diesel backup generators.
Wait, let me do the math on that. 25 buildings times 24 generators, that is potentially 600 industrial diesel generators sitting right across the street from a neighborhood.
Yes, and residents are terrified of the environmental impact. AI chips run incredibly hot, requiring immense cooling infrastructure.
Like huge fans.
Yeah, the community is citing the potential for permanent, continuous mechanical noise from industrial cooling fans running 200 core 7. They are worried about the destruction of local wetlands to build the concrete footprint.
And the water usage too, right?
Absolutely. They're deeply concerned about the unknown impacts on their private well water from the facility's immense liquid cooling needs. They argue this is heavy industrial development masquerading as a clean tech facility.
Honestly, if you're sitting at home right now listening to this and wondering why your own local utility bills have been creeping up over the last 3 years, the situation playing out in Hobart is exactly why.
Yeah.
You might be secretly competing with the cloud for your neighborhood's electricity. Because the physical footprint, the noise, the water, that is only half the battle for these residents. They are equally terrified of what this immense power draw is going to do to their monthly utility bills.
And this exposes a highly controversial financial experiment happening behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah.
To understand the financial stakes, we have to look at the local utility provider in northern Indiana, NIPSCO. Building the new power plants and transmission infrastructure required for a facility of this unprecedented size cost billions of dollars.
Right.
Utilities nationwide are scrambling to figure out how to finance these mandatory grid upgrades without completely bankrupting the local citizens who share the grid.
And we have a perfect example of this specific fear from the local reporting. There's a Hobart resident named Jennifer Williams. She literally had to start babysitting and selling her children's clothes online just to afford her electric bill.
Wow.
Yeah, it recently spiked from $200 to $380 a month due to previous utility infrastructure upgrades. And she is quoted in the local news saying, "My NIPSCO bill is for my home, not for a data center."
And NIPSCO understands that this public anger is a massive public relations and regulatory liability. So they have developed a first-of-its-kind novel corporate solution. They created a subsidiary called GenCo. GenCo is designed to negotiate directly with Amazon, and GenCo will be the entity that actually builds and owns the new power plants required to feed the data center.
Okay, let's unpack this. NIPSCO claims that by creating this GenCo subsidiary, they are completely isolating the financial risk away from the public.
Right.
They're telling their customers, hey, the data center is paying for its own power. You won't see a dime of this on your bill. In fact, they claim this specific corporate structure will return $1 billion in savings to regular ratepayers over the next 15 years.
That is the official position of the utility. But consumer advocates, such as Kerwin Olson from the Citizens Action Coalition, are raising severe red flags.
Why is that?
Because GenCo is structured as an unregulated merchant plant. It's technically distinct from the regulated utility. So the State Utility Commission has divested itself of the authority to audit GenCo's finances or publicize its contracts.
So no transparency.
Exactly. The public is essentially kept entirely in the dark about the actual financial terms and guarantees of the deal between GenCo and Amazon.
It feels incredibly similar to a corporate shell game. Like the utility is moving these multi-billion-dollar infrastructure costs under a different cup. So it looks like the local resident isn't paying for it. But consumer advocates are warning that if you lift the cups, the resident's money is still the one sitting on the table.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the advocates point to the actual legal mechanics of an Indiana law known as HEA 1007.
Okay, what does that do?
Well, state code dictates that utilities must maintain grid reliability for everyone. Under this law, even if a giant customer like a data center pays for 80% of a project's direct costs, the utility is still legally on the hook for the remaining 20% of the broader transmission and reliability upgrades.
And when you're talking about billions of dollars in new power plants and transmission lines, that 20% is a staggering number.
Staggering. If the financial projections are wrong, if the tech bubble bursts, or if the data center's power usage somehow drops, those billion-dollar power plants don't just disappear.
Right.
Consumer advocates warn that HEA 1007 bridges that gap, pulling the financial risk right back onto the public, meaning regular ratepayers like Jennifer Williams could absolutely end up footing the bill.
This deep, complex tension is exactly why we wanted to do this deep dive for you today. I mean, you probably use AI on your phone or your laptop every single day. It feels seamless. It feels entirely digital.
But the reality is that the magic of AI is intensely, unavoidably physical.
Yeah. It relies on multi-ton steel transformers that are stuck in years-long supply chain purgatory. It requires staggering amounts of electricity, and it's physically reshaping communities across the country. Towns like Hobart, Indiana are being asked to absorb the physical and environmental footprint of the global AI race, permanently altering the literal landscape of the Midwest.
And this raises a really important question as we look toward the future. We've talked extensively about how the AI boom is buying up every available large power transformer on the global market and eating up all the surplus grid capacity.
Right.
But what does this mean for the green energy transition?
Oh, wow. That is the billion-dollar question. Because wind farms, solar arrays, grid-scale battery storage facilities, they all require those exact same large power transformers to connect to the grid.
Exactly. They all need access to the exact same high-tension transmission lines.
So if tech giants are securing all the hardware and all the available grid capacity for artificial
It
intelligence,
suggests that the AI revolution and the global climate transition are currently on a direct collision course, fighting a zero-sum battle for the exact same physical resources.
it is a profoundly heavy thought,
Yeah.
almost as heavy as the cloud itself.